Hello, this is Papa B reading, and I'm going to be reading the second part of the last chapter of the book, The Magician's Nephew, which is one of the books in the complete chronicles of Narnia, written by C.S. Lewis and published by HarperCollins. And now I begin. Miss Ketterly, this is the most extraordinary case I have known in my whole medical career. It is like a miracle. I wouldn't tell the little boy anything at present. We don't want to raise any false hopes, but in my opinion, then his voice became too low to hear. That afternoon he went down to the garden and whistled their agreed secret signal for Polly. She hadn't been able to get back the day before. "What luck," said Polly, looking over the wall. "I mean about your mother. I think it's going to be all right," said Diggory. "But if you don't mind, I'd rather not talk about it yet. What about the rings?" "I've got them all," said Polly. "Look, it's all right. I'm wearing gloves. Let's bury them." "Yes, let's. I've marked the place where I buried the core of the apple yesterday." Then Polly came over the wall, and they went together to the place. But as it turned out, Diggory need not have marked the place. Something was already coming up. It was not growing so that you could see it grow as the new trees had done in Narnia, but it was already well above ground. They got a trowel and buried all the magic rings, including their own, in a circle around it. After a week, or about a week after this, it was quite certain that Diggory's mother was getting better. About a fortnight later, she was able to sit out in the garden, and a month later, that whole house had become a different place. Aunt Letty did everything Mother liked. Windows were opened, frowsy curtains were drawn back to brighten up the rooms. There were new flowers everywhere and nicer things to eat, and the old piano was tuned, and Mother took up her singing again and had such games with Diggory and Polly that Aunt Letty would say, "I declare, Mabel, you're the biggest baby of the three." When things go wrong, you'll find they usually go on getting worse for sometimes. But when things once start going right, they often go on getting better and better. After about 6 weeks of this lovely life, there came a long letter from Father in India, which had wonderful news in it. Old great Uncle Kirk had died. And this meant, apparently, that Father was now very rich. He was going to retire and come home from India forever and ever. And the great big house in the country, which Diggory had heard of all his life and never seen, would now be their home. The big house with the suits of armor, the stables, the kennels, the river, the park, the hothouses, the veneries, the woods, and the mountains behind it, so that Diggory felt just as sure as you that they were all going to live happily ever after. But perhaps he would like to know just one or two things more. Polly and Diggory were always great friends, and she came nearly every holiday to stay with them at their beautiful house in the country. And that was where she learned to ride and swim and milk and bake and climb. In Narnia, the beasts lived in such great peace and joy that neither the witch nor any other enemy came to trouble that pleasant land for many 100 years. King Frank and Queen Helen and their children lived happily in Narnia, and their second son became king of Archenland. The boys married nymphs, and the girls married wood gods and river gods. The lamppost, which the witch had planted without knowing it, shone day and night in the Narnian forest, so that the place where it grew came to be called Lantern Waste. And when many years later another child from our world got into Narnia on a snowy night, she found the light still burning, and that adventure was in a way connected with the ones I have just been telling you. It was like this. The tree which sprang from the core of the apple that Diggory planted in the back garden lived and grew into a fine tree. Growing in the soil of our world, far out of the sound of Aslan's voice and far from the young air of Narnia, it did not bear apples that would revive a dying woman, as Diggory's mother had been revived, though it did bear apples more beautiful than any others in England, and they were extremely good for you, though not fully magical. But inside itself, in the very sap of it, the tree, so to speak, never forgot that other tree in Narnia to which it belonged. Sometimes it would move mysteriously when there was no wind blowing. I think that when this happened, there were high winds in Narnia, and the English tree quivered. At that moment, the Narnia tree was rocking and swaying in a strong southwestern gale. However that might be, it was proved later that there was still magic in its wood. For when Diggory was quite middle-aged, and he was a very famous learned man, a professor and a great traveler by that time, and the Ketterleys' old house belonged to him, there was a great storm over the south of England which blew the tree down. He couldn't bear to have it simply chopped up for firewood, so he had part of the timber made into a wardrobe, which he put in his big house in the country. And though he himself did not discover the magic properties of that wardrobe, someone else did. That was the beginning of all the comings and goings between Narnia and our world, which you can read of in other books. When Diggory and his people went to live in the big country house, they took Uncle Andrew to live with them, for Diggory's father said, "We must try to keep the old fellow out of mischief. And it isn't fair that poor Letty should have had him always on her hands." Uncle Andrew never tried any magic again as long as he lived. He had learned his lesson, and in his old age he became a nicer and less selfish old man than he had ever been before. But he always liked to get visitors alone in the billiard room and tell them stories about a mysterious lady, a foreign royalty with whom he had driven about London. A devilish temper she had, he would say, but she was a fine woman, sir, a fine woman. And that ends not just chapter 15, the last chapter of The Magician's Nephew, but that ends our book. And I thank you very much for having joined me these many, many times I had the joy of reading to you. And I hope you will come back and let me read to you again.